and that this is what I'm curious to talk to you about really at some point is like, I'm not sure how to get from this life experience and these things to say, and even successes of helping people tell their story and get their brand out, develop their brand, all those things, into a package that then somebody might want to hire me for one of those.
So I won't have any like clear silver bullet answers, but because of the way that your experience singing has gone and the way that you've described it, I think I can put it in metaphors that maybe will, maybe I haven't really thought about how I did it. So, but I think there might be some parallels. So the way that I got into speaking was I knew that I wanted to do it. So when I moved to St. Louis a few years ago, I just started going to every speaking thing that I could because I didn't know I didn't have something to say. I just knew I wanted to do it. So I did Toastmasters and I did Rotary clubs and I went to anything where I could get invited, I would do it. And then eventually I met a guy, Travis Liebig, who paid me the first time to come in and give a talk. And he wanted it to be on anything that would keep his audience interested for a little while. He'd seen me give one talk. So that I
can probably do.
Yeah. And that's the open mic night almost, right? It's one step above open mic night. It's like, hey, come on in here and do something. And all it took was somebody give me a chance. Mm-hmm. And once I had that chance, then I had evidence that I could say something interesting. Mm-hmm. And it really did come down to, you have a group and you need to keep them busy or you need to get them thinking about a problem that they have. I'll sit down and figure out of my life experiences, how can I apply a solution or a story or something that makes them think about it in a different way?
Right.
And people say, yeah, I'll buy that. I've never done the stuff with the event planners or anything like that. I just find people that have an audience and we talk about it. And if you have all this music experience and the overcoming fright and dealing with problems along the way and pursuing your dream, like these are all things that there are lots of conferences that want that answered because those are the questions of the human experience, really.
Yeah, I think one of the things I know I want to talk about is creating your narrative. Like every time we write a song, we're creating a narrative, and all these brands or companies or individuals are struggling to figure out how to tell their story. And so to me, that's like an almost natural thing to do. And so I think I can help people do that. One thing that we haven't talked about, but I think that would be fun would be to talk to people about culture shock, because a lot of companies, I think, experience culture shock. And I would imagine, knowing your history, that when you did your Peace Corps things, there was a lot of discussion about what culture shock is and how to overcome it, right? Yeah. And so I have some international experience and learned the hard way about culture shock when I was young and had no idea what I was experiencing, and then learned how to get through it. And those exact same techniques, I think, would work for people in companies, whether that's the culture of a company or whether it's companies sending people to different countries or even different cities, and then how those people fit in and adapt, assimilate to those cultures. So I think those same things apply. And I've done that as a guy in a band from city to city, night to night, in little microscopic ways, as far as how do you assimilate quickly and overcome culture shock. Because you could just get on stage and, kind of come out from your closed space where you're safe, play your show, and then go away. But then you don't have that same connection with the people. So I would purposefully overcome that culture shock by just diving in, and like getting into the heart of a city and experience everything and saying yes when people ask me questions and that kind of thing. And so that's another thing I think I can speak from a band perspective that will apply to companies, corporations, brands.
That's fantastic. I mean, and that speaks to my soul, because I was so moved by culture that I went and got a graduate degree in cross-cultural negotiations, because I was like, most of the time when people are fighting with one another, it's not because they actually disagree. It's that they don't understand that the things that they want could come together in some mutually beneficial way. But I had never really thought about the thing that you're saying here about you can take that and really speak about it. And because really
those same little tools, I think, apply. Whether you're diving into a completely different country and way of life is sort of the same thing as you just moved into a different department, and that department has some different sort of basic rules that people unspoken ways that they operate, you know?
Did you have to develop a pretty thick skin traveling around to different cities? And
so a little bit, but my culture shock sort of knowledge and came before I was out of college. So like my degree's in anthropology, and I spent a summer in Nigeria, which was a wild place in 1994, I think it was. Still is a wild place, you know. But I was 18, and I think my professor really that I went with a few students and a professor to this tiny little village, you know, like one generator, power 2 hours a day kind of thing, for a summer. And I think that it was his sort of entertainment to see how we, instead of say, here's where we're going, here's what you're going to experience, and here's the way you get through this. I think he was just like, let's go. And I don't remember there being any sort of preparedness for it, you know? So I think for him, it was an experiment of, I wonder how these kids are going to do with this. And so that's when I learned about it, you know? And I learned about it by hitting rock bottom and then like
hitting rock bottom,
crawling out. Yeah. And yeah, I suppose it's different for everyone, but I think there are some commonalities when experiencing those things. You probably never experienced this because I think the Peace Corps trains you prepares you for.
I mean, you definitely make mistakes because if you're living there, it doesn't matter how much class you went to. 10 weeks isn't going to prepare you for snake oil salesman rolls into town or something.
So when we got there, people were overwhelmingly nice. People who had one shirt wanted to give it to you. You know, I don't know if it's the same for you, but probably similar. But your culture shock reaction to that is, why would I want that shirt? Or why are you doing that? What are you trying to get from me? Or is this some sort of game where you're going to hurt me? Or, you know what I mean? When it's not that. So what I had to learn was that just because it's different doesn't make it wrong, which is a very simple thing. Like I even just saying it makes me feel a little like maybe this is not worth talking about, but
no, it is. But this is fascinating. Yeah.
Everyone, I think, has this same reaction to something they're not familiar with, you know, which is to close off, like, and hold on to the thing that you know, as if it's right. And then that's what makes what you're saying. That's what makes this conflict, you know,
and the emotion that you feel of, I feel unsafe, ends up getting externalized as you did something wrong.
Yeah.
And the other person is sitting over there being like, I remember one time I offered my mother the homestay that I was at. She was coming to me to do like a kindness. She was like, I noticed that your pants are dirty. I'll have my daughters wash them for you. Mm-hmm. And instead of just saying like, oh, thank you, like that's so helpful because I didn't have time to do it. I said, oh, that's great. I'll give them each some money. And she was like, what? And then I thought she meant like, oh, that's not very much. You should say how much. So I tell her I'll give them the equivalent of $5, which would be the equivalent of like 4 days of work out in the fields. And it's like, you just offered to give my daughters like what would take me 2, 3, 4 days to earn. Like, that was the most offensive thing I could have done. And I just couldn't understand why she was getting mad at me for offering money.
Right. Yeah. And unless you worked through that, unless you thought through that, talked through that, and you did it with sort of a smile and an open mind, that just turns into a conflict that then never gets better. Where I was, people they kept coming in the morning, like before the sun came up, and knocking on the door with a tray full of food that had like, you know, chilies on top, like super hot peppers. And I kept thinking, are they trying to poison me? Like, why do they keep bringing me this and waking me up? Like, how rude are they to wake me up in the morning and give me this stuff that makes my stomach hurt? Like, what? But they were just being kind, you know, and like but your immediate reaction is, it's sort of like fear-based, you know? And so, yeah, my example, and when I say hit rock bottom, like I spent my whole youth thinking I wanted to grow up to be a National Geographic photographer. And I know one of your other guys talked about that too, but that was my dream. That was what I said I want to be when I grow up, a National Geographic photographer. That's like saying you want to be, you know, an NFL quarterback. But at the time I thought that, and I even had a high school teacher who was like, this is what you should do. And that's why I went to school for anthropology. You know, like I was doing this path.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
And I had a visual emphasis. So like everything I did, I photographed and I, you know, shot for the paper and things like that. And so my anthropology degree, it was really a photography degree. But so all I wanted to do was be a National Geographic photographer. And I was in Africa in a tiny village in the most beautiful, you know, on the equator. And it was amazing. But I was so closed off and culture shocked and fearful and angry because I didn't know how to process that stuff, that I sat in this house for weeks and read National Geographic magazines because that was the comfortable thing. And that was what felt right. And that was what I thought I was supposed to. And it wasn't until like halfway through the trip that I like broke out of that and like learned that if I just like opened my mind, if I just dove in, if I just took advantage of the opportunities that were there, that's when the experiences happen, you know? And that's when, I don't know, I got to develop this a little bit.
You were blowing my mind because I had never actually thought about what my coping mechanism was in Kenya from this culture shock, which I had. And what I ended up doing was finding one person that was working on something intently and asked them to teach me that. And so like there was a guy, I had to stay at this hotel because I was really, really sick. And he was downstairs building his own weight set out of concrete and like these like barrels. Yeah. And another guy in my little home village he made furniture. So I said, you know, I'll come and apprentice under you. And we could barely communicate, but it allowed me to then meet all the other people around me. But that was entirely my coping mechanism.
Yeah. So that's you using those tools, I think, that brought you, you know, that kept you safe from that sort of culture shock. That was your remedy. And I had people like that too eventually. You know, like I met this guy who was making little talking flutes by hand carving them, and I still have a bunch of them. And I just sat with him and photographed him and learned how to learn the whistle, which then, you know, sort of taught me a little bit more about their language because it was a tonal language, you know, and like, so it was an amazing thing. But like one of the pitfalls, I was already playing music and I was, you know, feeling really inspired to write songs. And I was in love with someone that I left at home who didn't really want me to go. And there was all these emotions pulling, you know, and I had this song that I wanted to like finish and then give to her. So she knew that I was serious and I missed her, you know, but I couldn't find a guitar anywhere. And it became like a real obsession to like find a guitar in the middle of Nigeria where it wasn't an instrument that, you know, and I made it be not only my obsession, but like everybody around me's obsession. It was all I talked about. Like, oh, you're going to that town. Can we go there and see if there's a guitar in that town? Oh, you might have heard of a guitar in this other town. Can I hitch a ride to that town? And so everybody was trying to help me find a guitar, you know, but really that was just, another way I was trying to like, that wasn't helping my culture shock because I was just staying in my own world and my own version of normal, you know.
But it helped you walk out, right? You're going to visit other towns. Like that's, and it's kind of funny that the metaphor of the guitar is the thing that covers over you on stage as well.
Yeah,
right.
That's
like
true.
There's something.
There's my
there.
security blanket again. I wrote the song, I finished it, and I still probably play it from time to time today. But I faxed it home because this was 94, I think. It took like 8 hours to get to a town where there was a fax machine to fax it home. And I faxed it home and I don't know, every once in a while I run into this rolled up piece of paper that I open up and it's completely blank because the fax is, you know, faded away. But that song, she still had that.
You know, I remember like when you're traveling and there's like a love interest, it feels so much more powerful because you're completely alone and isolated. Mm-hmm. And so it's, you know, it's in some ways it's not all that different than you're in prison and they're far away and you're not in an actual prison. But like in my case, I know I had created it in my mind. And so this becomes so much more important to you than other things, probably because it's easy. It's easy to focus on. It's easy to let your heart be. I bet there are a lot of soldiers that have that experience.
Yeah. And I wonder, so when were you in the Peace Corps?
2005.
So when I was on this trip and some other international stuff I've done, there was no internet or anything, you know, and really almost no phones. It was weird that there was a fax machine, but we had to travel so far to get on a phone, and then we would wait in a line for hours to get to that phone. And then when you got to the phone, you had, I don't remember, maybe 4 minutes or something, whatever it was, because there was a line. And I remember having one of those conversations where and there was a huge delay, like a 10-second delay or something. You'd say something, and then we got in an argument on the phone, and it was like, no, that's not what I meant. And then there'd be a delay, and it was just total breakdown of communication. And then it was like, time's up. And then it was end of the line, but we didn't have time to get into the line because we had 4-hour drive to get back to our town. So then it was like 2 weeks later before I could get back on the phone and be like.
And when person is living back in regular land, they cannot possibly comprehend what you have done to just get to this point.
Yeah.
And then to be like,
yep,
popped away from it.
Yep. So wild.